I'd like to welcome you all here to the UChicago Center in Delhi for today's conversation on writing. If you're new to the University of Chicago Center, you might want to put your name on our mailing list, which you can do the desk at the entry, or look at our website, uchicago.in, and you'll see that we have a whole range of events coming up in the next week or two on topics including talk about the environment, photography, cancer research, the future of the liberal arts in India. But as a faculty person in the area of humanities, I'm always especially happy to have events here that focus not only on the humanities, but on the humanities in practice and in performance. And so it's great to have the opportunity to have another pair of fine writers in conversation. I'd also like to welcome Bloomsbury, India back to the center and to thank them for their role in making this evening possible. We had a pretty good time last time when they were here, when they brought William Dalrymple, who had a conversation with himself. And tonight it's nice that we have not only a great writer, but another great writer who also happens to be a member of our faculty in Chicago in the creative writing program, and who has flown into Chicago, especially for this event, on his very first trip to India. And I'm also honored to see in the audience some other great writers, including especially Shri Uday Prakash, who some of whose work in Hindi has been translated into English by another member of our creative writing faculty, Jason Grunenbaum, who also teaches Hindi for us. So tonight I'm going to introduce just briefly the two people who will be in conversation, and then I'll turn it over to them for a conversation followed by question and answer. So our local writer this evening is Raj Kamal Jha, who is the chief editor of the Indian Express, which has won the International Press Institute's India Award for Excellence in Journalism 3 times. He also writes novels, which include The Blue Bedspread, which was shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award, and the winner of the 2000 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book, Eurasia, and the New York Times Notable Book of the Year. Also, If You're Afraid of Heights, a finalist for the Hutch Crossword Book Award in 2003, and Fireproof, rated first in CNN IBN's list of the best books published in India in 2006. His novels have been translated into more than a dozen languages. He works here in New Delhi and lives in Gurgaon. Our visitor from Chicago is Tran, who is an assistant professor of practice in the arts in the Department of English and in the Committee on Creative Writing at the University of Chicago. He is also a fiction writer, and so far his work has been preoccupied with the legacy of the Vietnam War, for the Vietnamese who remained in the homeland, for the Vietnamese who immigrated to America, and for the Americans whose lives have intersected with both of these groups. His first novel, Dragonfish, concerns an American police officer's search in Las Vegas for his ex-wife, a Vietnamese refugee whose letters to the daughter she abandoned decades ago comprise the book's secondary narrative. The unraveling of her mysterious disappearance also reveals characters grappling with who they are in light of what they've lost: kin, country, love, and morals. So these are our two participants in the conversation tonight, and the title of that discussion is Why We Tell Stories, Finding Your Voice, the Importance of Plot, the Choice of Place in Fiction. And so I now commend to your well-invested attention Raj Kamal Jha and Tran.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Tubbs and everyone at the Delhi Center for inviting me here. like Professor Tubb says, this is my first time in India, my first time in Delhi, so it's not disappointed yet. I will say, because he mentioned this, that I just came a day or so ago, so if I'm bad at this, it's jet lag. If he's bad at it, he has no reason.
He's got a wonderful reason to screw up. I don't.
You don't.
But I will very hard, yeah.
But thank you very much for visiting us and letting me talk with you, have a conversation with you. I'm really pleased to be introduced to your work and to your wonderful novel. Just so everyone knows, we're going to have about a 45-minute conversation. And afterwards there'll be a Q&A, and you can ask Raj anything that's on your mind. So as we chat, please remember all your brilliant questions and ask them when the time comes.
And don't spare who as well.
I thought we'd begin with the very beginning of the book, which is a quote from Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. And I just want to read the line from Oliver Twist, the lines. Midnight had come upon the crowded city, the palace, the night cellar, the jail, the madhouse, the chambers of birth and death, of health and sickness, the rigid face of the corpse and the calm sleep of the child. Midnight was upon them all. Now, there are obviously some similarities between your novel and Dickens' novel. For example, in yours, there's an orphan at the center, and yours is similarly a portrait of a dense city and its stratified peoples, its evils and its virtues. But I was wondering, beyond those two immediate parallels, why did you choose that epigraph? And where might your portrait of 21st century Delhi kind of diverge from Dickens' portrait of 19th century London?
Well, first, thank you very much for being here. And thank you, Wu, for coming all the way. There is one very simple reason why I use that Dickens paragraph, and that's because that was my first big book I ever read in my life.
Really?
Yeah. And the first big book that
How old were you?
I think I was about 12 or 13. I did not understand everything. I reread it at 46 when I was in Berlin, working on my book. And I have reread that book many, many times. And more than the squalor and the city, and it is just this incredible story of a kid who has no one to love him. And later, when you read a lot more, and when you become less innocent as the days go by, then you bring layers to the story of politics. But at the core of it, it was a kid who steps into this world the day his mother steps back, steps out of it. And to me, as a kid, that was incredibly scary, and at the same time, fascinating to think about. Like, what does it mean? So in a way, the book was it has stayed with me for a long, long time. And just as I was reading your work the last week. I'm sorry, I wish I had read more of it. And just the fact, I think you say that in one of your print interviews, that memory is essentially about losing, is about loss more than reclaiming anything. And so both these things were at the back of my mind when I wrote this book.
So interesting.
Yeah. So to me, Dickens, that specific thing was about loss.
Now, is that a personal loss for you too? I mean, I imagine that if you're reading Oliver Twist when you're 12 years old, that even though Oliver's journey is dark and scary, that it's adventurous.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, it's adventurous
But-
and fagging. And
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but as a 46-year-old man, how much of that adventure or that adventurousness has been lost to you, or did you find it was still there when you read it?
Yeah, it was very much there. You know, I'm a fan of fiction. I know it sounds sort of stating the obvious, but I really, I'm a fan. So I love the fact that we can make things up.
It's great. Isn't it?
I think it's fantastic. I think we live because we can make things up. I think hope is fiction.
That's right.
Hope is something we write in our heads. Hope is entirely fiction. And I think we are, I think perhaps the only warm-blooded mammal who can make things up. And I think we need fiction. And so in a way for me, when I read the book at 46, it was more about a kid who steps beyond the loss of his mom and finds people who care for him. There are people in the book who care for the young. And also I was seeing it as a father of a 6-year-old. So that's a whole new layer.
Sure.
So there are many readings of the book.
But you mentioned that there are these darker, more political layers as well. Those lines that you quote are rather dark.
Very dark.
I mean, it ends with midnight is upon us all. The sense of foreboding. I mean, do you cast as foreboding a light on New Delhi, on Delhi, as a city, as say, Dickens was with these lines on London? There is a darkness in this novel that is at times quite disturbing. And I was curious, I mean, how much of that was on your mind when you began writing?
Very, very much so, because when I said I'm a fan of fiction, at the same time, I work in a daily newspaper, and one of the things that we learn, and we are taught, and we learn, and we wrestle every day with, is that look beyond the lights, look where the TV camera does not go, talk to people who cannot speak for themselves, meet people who cannot walk into TV studios and talk, which is essentially looking in the dark. If something is wonderfully neat and clean and well lit, it's not so much fun.
Don't trust it.
Don't trust it. It's not so much fun. It's so much more fun to walk about in the dark and to stumble across things, and with a torch that you're not sure whether it will work or not. So to me, as I work in a daily newspaper, and the overwhelming India story, as many of you here, students of India and students of India studies, know that the overwhelming India story is one of hope. And that is because of the sheer numbers and the demographics and the fact that 600 million people are below the age of 30. You don't have any place in the world, in any democracy, with that kind of numbers. And if you have that, there's a lot of hope. But to me, as a fiction writer, what struck me was, what if the hopes are not met? What if they remain fiction?
That's my next question. Well, what do you do with hope when you've only met disappointment?
And then what is your head filled with? We talk about the flat world, and that it's a level playing field, and there's a wonderful opportunity. If you study hard, you can get things done. But what if the flat world just shifts for a moment? What if you slide off the flat world? What goes on if you fall into dark places from the flat world? And I think this book of mine was born just thinking of that what do you do when there is despair? When you have been told that everything is hopeful?
It's very much, I mean, that's the kind of the crisis that Americans have been living with for over 200 years. I think that's why, you know, happiness, we're not the most happy, we're not the happiest bunch, Americans, because we're so filled with ambition and hope. And, you know, you're taught as a kid that that's the American dream. Anyone, you can do whatever you want as long as you try hard. But that's just not true. And you feel that Delhi is becoming, I mean,
not just Delhi, I think there is a bit of the US in every city in the world right now.
Sure, yeah. China, yeah.
And which has its wonderful things. So let's not say that, you know, I think there is something wonderful about the fact that you can build yourself a city in your head. But what if you cannot? And I think maybe as a journalist, you wrestle with it intellectually. You look at the politics of it, you look at the economics of it. Then maybe there's a reason why some people cannot make it, and some people do. There are wonderful reasons for that, and it's very well argued. It's not a very original idea. A lot of philosophers have talked about that inequality. But when you are writing stories as a fiction writer, the only response you have is a lament, I guess, maybe, and you want to bring these people together and see what they interact.
I mean, it definitely seems like the novel, you're doing that in the novel, this kind of, you know, conflation of voices, both of hope, but also of disappointment and regret and fear. I mean, the structure of the novel, I've written to you in your emails, a very polyphonic form, very fragmented. You can't read the novel without hearing all these disparate voices in first person, second person, third person, you know, poor and rich, imaginary and real. And, you know, I mean, was this a form that you began with when you started the novel, or did the form come out of you writing, you know, the first parts of the novel?
No, I think both. I think both. You know, one is, I think each one of you here knows very well that as soon as you step out of this bubble where we are sitting now, and you step into the Rajiv Chowk metro station or a bus or whatever you have used to come home, you just hear the voices. You know, unlike many other places in the world, in Delhi or any other city in this country, we are fortunate / unfortunate to live, to step into one world and the other at the same moment. So you hear these voices. You hear somebody on the subway, on the metro. When you step out of the metro, you hear somebody in the auto rickshaw. There are these so many different worlds that live next door to each other.
And they contradict each other.
They contradict each other, and you have to flit between them. So it is not just an intellectual idea that I can deal with them at the cerebral level. You have to deal with them at the physical level and at the emotional level. There are many worlds inside our own homes. There are many worlds inside our families. And so when I was writing this book, I really thought that, you know, the way to do justice in a way which I can do was just let the, you know, in your wonderful words, let the polyphony stay intact.
But you know, it's very interesting, man. I think it's a testament to your talent that it feels cohesive. You know, I found myself, you know, reading it and finding the image of a dog carrying an infant child like a horse. I found that adorable, and I was smiling. And then, you know, pages later, there's rape, there's a murderer. One of the main characters is a murderer, and yet it feels cohesive in the sense, I think, of form. You know, the voices contradict each other, but they feel of the same universe.
Yeah, because you know, at the end of the day, when you go to bed at night, doesn't your day seem fairly cohesive?
Mm.
Despite all the madness, despite all the contradictions in your life and what you hear, when you go to sleep at night, or sort of at the end of the day, your life is fairly, somehow all the missing pieces fit.
Well,
or if they don't fit, you
but
know,
that's because I'm a self-centered person. I only think from my own consciousness. But somehow you've been able to project all these separate consciousness. I mean, again, there's so many different voices, all convincing, all fairly different, if not vastly different. I mean, I noticed, for example, how, you know, woman's voice is very close, very intimate.
Yeah.
Man's voice is a little bit more distant.
Yeah.
It's third person. And then a child's voice, well, child's not even a personality yet. It's all the other characters surrounding child. And there's a distance and a closeness that you play with throughout the novel. And I guess that's kind of the way we interact with any city we're in, or any world,
Yeah.
right?
And especially in an ecosystem where there are so many layers and it is so highly stratified. But to me, at sort of going back to where we started, was that it is about the fiction that we live with, the things we tell ourselves in the solitude of our own minds, things we tell ourselves to just cope with the day. And you know, whenever we are, you know, I feel that in my life, I'm sure, you know, we've all felt it as writers and as human beings and as parents and as fathers and as husbands and as blah blah blah, that we tell ourselves things which are essentially stories. We don't know how to solve something, but we sort of kind of make a story in our heads and hope that it works out. And to me, that is kind of the overriding impulse in this book, is about people, which is the title of the book in a way, building their own cities. So each one carrying her city on her back like a turtle, that each one carrying home. And which also brings me to the idea where when I read your work, I found a very strong resonance, and I would like you to speak about that a bit, if you don't mind, is that about the whole idea of home. Because to me, home is a very fascinating idea. Home in 2015. What is home? As soon as I land in Bombay when I go to work, or almost once in 10 days, and everybody lands and then they switch their phone on. The moment you get a signal, your phone book comes to life. Is that home? Is that your new home? Do we carry homes with us? If you look at what is happening in the world, you know, I read this incredibly scary statistic, and it's a fact, that last year was the worst year in human history of people losing homes. Never in human history have so many people become refugees in such a short time.
From war, natural disaster.
War mainly. This week's National Geographic has this incredible feature on Syria, and if you look at it,
Yeah.
it's tough to sleep that night, you know. And so what is home? And I think when we say we build a city, we build a home.
Oh, sure.
I think each one of us is building a home every day, and I see that in your work. That because you also moved to the U.S. when you were.
I was 5. Yeah. Yeah.
So to you, because you've lived in the U.S. now, and then you went to your place in '96,
Yeah.
Vietnam. What is home when you write? I really wanted you to.
It's a great question. I mean, I've always thought like a house is a building, but home is a feeling. For me, home has always been a feeling. It's never been a place, because I was kind of deprived of that. But I feel like I'm not that different from a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, home is a feeling. Home is memory more than anything. And so, when you write about home, you end up writing about that feeling. And place is involved, I think. But if you can't get that feeling on paper, then you're not writing about home yet.
And I love that line that I think you say in one of your interviews, that it is not like somebody gives you a key and you open a door.
Yeah.
Searching for a home is not as simple as that you find your ideal home.
Yeah.
You need to build it.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, that's funny that it was always kind of there, in the title, but when you said it made complete sense. I mean, building a city is building a home, but it's also part of building a narrative for yourself.
Yeah.
And the narrative that you create for yourself, so much of that is involved in where your home is and how that home feels to you, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still curious though, because I am new to Delhi, and I'm curious about your feelings on Delhi as opposed to other cities that you've been to. And India as a country as well, as opposed to other countries you've been to. Let me contextualize this a bit. I worked with a group of American writers, including me. We worked with some Chinese writers, and we exchanged stuff. They gave us one of their novels, To Live by Yu Hua, and we gave them Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I don't know why, but it's a great novel. But I mean, of all the novels to get them, and I remember one Chinese writer said, "We Chinese, we're obsessed with the past. And you Americans, you're obsessed with the future. You're always thinking about the future." And I thought that was very interesting. When I was reading your novel, I got the sense that a lot of the characters mimic the city. They ride the metro, they shop at the mall. And they try to write their own lives, or rewrite them, or imagine how they might rewrite them. And in that sense, they live in the present more. There's very little of the past in this novel, it seems to me. There's a lot of the future in the present. Do you feel that Delhi, especially you said half the population is under 30, is that the ambition you're talking about?
I think
constantly thinking about the future, not thinking as much about the past?
Very, very, very strong, because I think one of the very incredibly strong social forces that comes from the fact that we are a very young nation.
Yeah.
We're about 600 million, and that's 2 times the population of the U.S. Is below the age of 30. What this means is that the weight of history is much sort of smaller than the weight of hope, of dreams.
Yeah.
And you find that in the increasing impatience on the street. You find that in the last 4 or 5 years, the number of young people who come out on the streets to actively protest. You see that in a discourse where you find more and more voices wanting an instant solution.
Yeah.
No, you can't tell a 25-year-old woman who's really upset that somebody has been raped in Delhi. You can't tell her that, look, it was worse 30 years ago. You cannot tell people that, look, it is getting better. That line that, say, a 48-year-old can understand and has seen it, doesn't work for a 28-year-old.
Not really.
It doesn't.
Doesn't work for some 30 and 40-year-olds either.
It doesn't work at all. So that's saying that, and you see that in every discourse now in India. which is good, which I think forces institutions to step on the gas, so to speak. But it is also, it can lead to discontent. You see that in a lot of rage, outrage on the streets, that, like the first thing that happened after the rape in Delhi, I'm sure many of you have followed it, was that there is something wrong with our law, hang the rapist. And then somebody said, hey, look, he's below the age of 18, so change the law. Change the law. Why should a 16-year-old be hanged? And then there are further studies, and then there is another study which then tells you that 94% of those accused of rape are people you know. So you can give context and you can give the perspective, but at the heart of it, you are dealing with a population that is young, that's impatient.
So how do you address, outside of giving statistics, how do you confront that impatience? Do you remind the young of the past more? Is that part of the responsibility of the artists, of the journalists, of the historian?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's a very interesting question that goes to the heart of what we do. In the newspaper, you sort of, we joke around that we have to shine the cold light of reason, and facts are sacred, and tell people. And as a politician, you need to come up with a very interesting way to talk about it. You cannot come out to 5,000 young people on the streets of Delhi and say, hey, go and read history. You have to come up with a more intelligent formulation if you are a politician. If you are a writer, you have to look at it differently. So I think these were some of the things on my mind when I was working on this book.
But it's so interesting you mentioned politicians and writers. I feel like politicians offer the easy narratives. That's how, the easier the narrative, the easier it is for them to get reelected. Artists, writers, for example, they offer the difficult narratives. And I guess the ideal is some combination of both. I'm always of the mind that you should engage with the difficult narratives. John Keats's negative capability, the productive mind is the one that engages with doubt and uncertainty. That's my ideal, but I know that's not realistic, because most people can't deal with the difficult narrative. Do you find I don't want to phrase it a job, but one of your responsibilities as a writer is to offer that difficult narrative? This is a very difficult narrative.
Of course, absolutely. I think in the newsroom as well, what we tell our work colleagues is gray. Remove the black and white.
Sure.
Complicate your story. Okay, because we all know, each one of us knows here that our lives are incredibly complicated. No story is so simple as 9 o'clock on TV makes it out to be. It's not, and so you're right. In a way, our job is to complicate the narrative without confusing it, and to tell people that there's no darkness, and there's no light, and there's no villain, and there's no hero. It's all mixed up.
Okay, you talk about in an interview you talked about the fault lines.
Yeah.
As a journalist, you're interested in the fault lines between man, wife, husband, son, day, night, city, village. Let's talk about your job in newspapers. What has that given you as a person and as a writer? Have you ever thought, for example, how different a writer you would have been if you were, say, a businessman or a farmer or...
Very, very, very tough hypothetical, but...
Very tough, I know.
But I know one thing, that I think at the newspaper where I work, the Indian Express, I think what is very important, and I think what what you learn from a newsroom is that as you do not judge people, and that everybody, as you said, has a narrative, and you have to listen to them, and your job is to go out and listen to people who cannot be heard, who don't have the tools to write a book or to be heard, something as simple as that. And there are many of those people in India, and I think in any country. And I think it's just to complicate the narrative. Like, I like one of your, that, I don't know, it's about the father and the daughter. The father is a soldier, and he thinks based on his memories that his daughter may have killed her husband. And I'm not going to spoil the story, but there's a wonderful revelation at the end. But it is about memory. It is about a very complicated narrative.
Yes.
It is about a father's love and the daughter's love and the father's history and memory. And the father wants to believe something.
Exactly.
And he has constructed the city in his head.
You're so right.
Yeah. So I think our job as writers, if one may use that word, we don't have a job as writers.
No.
But if there is something, it is to complicate the narrative, because not because it's a good thing to do, but because I think life is very complicated.
Sure. I agree.
Very, very few conflicts that we face in our lives on a daily basis, or a weekly basis, or a yearly basis, or a lifetime basis are very easy to solve.
But you say, as a reporter, as a journalist, you do not judge. But as a fiction writer, do you feel you judge a little bit more?
I don't. I love all my characters.
But isn't loving them judging them?
Maybe
You're judging them worthy of your love. I mean, I ask this because writers always say, I don't judge my characters.
No, I love all my characters. And if love is judgment, so be it.
Okay, so okay.
Because it's like I have only one kid, but if you have many kids, you know that. So that even if somebody is a sleazeball or a scumbag, you know why he or she is.
Yeah.
There is always a reason why somebody screws up.
Yeah.
Now it is up to you to either see the reason or say I will. I don't want to see the reason. Everything we do that's wrong, in quotes,
Yeah.
there is a reason. Now whether it is justifiable or not, how much sense it makes, are you willing to listen to it? Are you generous enough to give me the long rope?
Yeah.
That's all that comes later. But I think it begins with a reason. And when you write a book, when I'm sure you in your stories there are ghosts.
Yeah.
and there are these dark characters as well. But each one is beautiful. At the
To
end
me,
of the story.
yeah.
And to readers, because there is nobody you say I don't like him or her.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't like him or her, you know that you needed that person for the story to work.
Sure. Yeah.
So you can't be harsh on your characters.
Well, I mean, but some writers are. Some writers I feel do judge their characters harshly. I mean, what do you think of a writer that Well, let me think about that. That you have unlikable characters.
No, I think you're right. I think there is a reason, but those are uncomplicated narratives, like a wonderful murder mystery, where somebody has been killed and raped, and there's this evil stalker who has killed 17 women and the great detective will sort him out. Okay, these are uncomplicated narratives, and the reason they work so well is because one reason why the top 9 out of 10 bestsellers are murder mysteries is because it's an uncomplicated narrative. It works in Swedish, it works in Hindi, it works in English. There is almost nothing lost in translation. Because there is an evil guy and there is a cop who will solve the case.
But I know in America, those easy narratives are the ones, the books that sell. Literary fiction does not sell very well. I mean, you have, Jonathan Tran will always sell books.
Yeah.
But, I mean, is that, I'm not familiar with the reading public here. I mean, I have a sense that they're more sophisticated than American readers. But do you find that you have to, fight against or compete with those kinds of easy narratives? Or do you ever think about?
No, I should take the 5th on that amendment. But I think that is something that I can't answer because I don't have the data yet. But look, it is much more fun to read a simple narrative.
Yeah.
Let's face it. I think there's some incredibly good long form on television. I think we live in a very interesting time when we face competition in the storytelling world from HBO and Homeland, Game of Thrones, and I don't know what these wonderful serials. And
Sure, yeah.
these are, and they want to be complicated, but you see by the 6th episode they're all very beautifully uncomplicated, and they work so well.
Yeah.
So I think we are, there is something inside us that is yearning for an uncomplicated story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do agree with that.
And I think the reason why these books do so well is because they speak to some missing pieces in all our hearts.
Well,
And Wu, I'm very sorry, but you and I complicated, and that's why maybe no. It is very it is tough. See, also I think reading in 2015, reading a novel calls for a certain contract with yourself of solitude.
Yes.
It's difficult. It is very difficult in this day and age for someone to sit and read a 250-word page novel. You have to be damaged in a certain way to read. And we just hope that there are many damaged people. And in the world of 7 billion, you hope that there are some that
I completely agree. I think the prerequisites for being alone in 2015 are vastly different from the prerequisites for being alone just 20 years ago.
And you cannot enjoy a novel if you do not like, if you're not comfortable being alone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I still have more questions for you, but I feel like we should open the conversation to everyone else here. If you have questions, please. Please.
You said that, let me give you the microphone. You said that, we, as a journalist, you end up telling people that you should complicate things because we live in a gray world, right? And at the end of the day, all the narratives that we hear are complicated. And then you also said that we prefer simplicity. But do you think that's the only reason that, complexity exists, or that we prefer gray narratives? Isn't there something in us that actually likes complexity, or likes something to be more complicated than it actually is, and to try and believe that?
That's very interesting.
Right? Rather than just a simple. Isn't that why you exist, for example? Or, I mean, why writers exist?
No, that's a very, very interesting thing, I think. I wish, I don't know, maybe there is a part of us that wants not to be judged, that wants gray. But I think, it is much simpler. it is much easier for all of us to sort of engage with the simple narrative. And if you see some of the wonderful politicians who communicate very effectively, one of the common things you find in all the discourse is their amazing capability to simplify things. So if, like hope, or that, I will fix it for you. But and that works very, very well.
But
So I can tell me.
but don't you think we like complexity also because if it's simple, the world ends. If it's complex, the world keeps going, And if the world keeps going, there's always possibilities.
I think
And I think that's very attractive,
You're very,
very
but,
appealing.
but I think that's a choice you make. Also, it's not binary that I want simple
Yeah.
or complex. On some days you may love complexity. In certain things you may like complexity. In certain things you may not. Being a father of everything kind of makes sense to me because I have a young kid, and then when your kid is sick, you don't want a complicated narrative. You want a simple blood test and you want a solution. There you don't want a gray. So I think it varies in the conflicts that we face.
But in the example of the kid, there is an end, right? You want him to become well again. You want him to survive.
Yeah.
But would you say that there is such an end to writing? Is there?
Not writing, yeah. Of course, I am completely with you on that. When I sit down to write or sort of engage with the story, you're right. I look at how complex it is, and as Wu said, that is the fun part of it, because that is what keeps you going from page to page. How do you solve, in quotes, the complexity? And I think that's why both Wu and I have day jobs.
That's a good point.
Okay, so I got here, and then I'll go over there.
2-3 times you mentioned here, India has a young population. Our planning commission report says 50% of them are malnourished. So where are the hopes?
I completely agree with you. I think that is the point I made, that why you have so many young people, and one of the most important things of being young is to be impatient and is to be hopeful. The young are by definition more hopeful, since they have more years left than the old. But when you have these fault lines, when 50%, I've not seen that, I've not checked that number, but I think you're very right. That's it. A very big number of the young are malnourished. Many of them, they don't have a level playing field. So that is what I look in the book for. What takes place when they don't have hope? What fills their head when they don't have hope? You're right.
Yeah, so can I go in here? So this has been a very interesting discussion, because what I find is there are veils and veils and veils. And then something you think you know, like your breakfast cereal, is actually not your breakfast cereal, it's something else. It's just that you were told that this is what it is and you believe that. So as you go through life, part of the complexity is removing the filters which other people's interpretation or their delusions or their desire for a better world have placed over your vision. And that's the complication. Things are simple, but then figuring out which part is simple and which is a perception or distortion of the truth is what's really the most difficult part. So I look forward to reading both your books to see how you tackle this very difficult issue. And I also really enjoyed the concept of home, because I think India is a country with millions of refugees, economic, geographical, political, religious, and everybody is grappling with the concept of what is home, what does home mean to me, where do I belong, where are my people, where they look like me, talk like me, think like me, and there isn't such a place. There isn't such a place. So thank you.
Yes, to me, contemporary Indian art, and that would include novel writing, often appears to have form, but is a bit lacking in substance. A novel is a comment on society, and in Western countries, ideas are taken seriously, and societies are constantly reformed and modified in their light. But India is a very rigid and ossified country, where ideas matter hardly at all. Thus, a policeman's job is more coveted than that of a teacher, because a policeman can get things done, push people around, but a teacher can't. So I don't see this India in Indian writings. I don't see it in Amish. I don't see it in Chetan Bhagat. So, I mean, Raj, forgive me, I haven't read your novels, but the talk hasn't convinced me that I'm going to see this India. And Naipaul, in that sense, is right, that he often doesn't see India in Indian writings.
I am not so pessimistic as you are. I think yes, you're right to one extent that there's a lot of stuff in Indian writing that may not do justice to the complexity that the country is. This is a fact. But at the same time, I think you are seeing more and more voices now than ever. There are more and more Indian books in this language, English. If you read other languages, there's some incredibly fascinating work in Hindi, in Bengali. But if you're talking about just English language fiction, there are more people writing than there were 10 years ago. And I very strongly believe that 10 years later, there'll be many, many more. And just as with every other thing, there is a bell curve. Most of the stuff will be mediocre. Some will be good, some will be not worth reading. But I think we just have to wait for more and more people to get the confidence to talk about themselves, to talk about the stories that they see. The fact that we do not have 50 wonderful books in English every year, I think it's just because of mathematics. Just look at the number of people who read English. It's just a microscopic minority, still in 2015. It'll take time, and you see more and more, there are many interesting voices in fiction. You may like them, you may not like them. That's entirely individual choice, but there are more people getting the confidence to write. And I think that's a good thing. There is no debate, how good they are or how good they can be, that is another debate. But I don't know if that helps answer your question, but that's my observation.
So there are two parts of your comment earlier which I liked about your novel. One was spatial, and you were talking about living in Delhi, going from the metro to the auto to a Gurudwara or a temple down the street and passing through numerous worlds. And the other is temporal, where you talk about the year 2015, living in a city, how the US is also in India. And it seems like this is part of the complexity. When we live in this type of information world, when we have information colliding at us, cultural information colliding at us from every which direction, what role do you think that the novel or art has in actually bringing together all of this information to basically kind of present a certain portrait for people to actually understand what's going on? Because in some ways you can say the world is complicated, but in another way you can say by bringing together the complications into a composite, we might be able to understand it better. And then the following question is whether or not you think that the novel is the best way to do that nowadays in a time when it's difficult for people to sit down and pay attention and read, or when it's competing with so many other fragmented media stimuli from all directions.
Oh, no, you take it.
you are the one who teaches this. So you take it, but then I'll.
But the latter question is the novel.
The role of the novel, yeah.
Boy, that is a great question. I think that's a question that academics and writers and everyone alike is struggling with. I don't know if the novel is the best way to tell that story, for the story of today. As a writer, you just have to kind of like choose what you're best at, and try to get as close. I mean, really, I don't think that'd be looking like for a perfect narrative. I don't think that's possible anyway. But I think as long as you have language, you have all the possibilities out there. That's the best as I can answer it. This is your job to answer it.
Well, since he teaches and I don't, I'll be much bolder. I think novel is beautiful. I think it's a wonderful form because I think it is the only form where you have such an absolute intimacy with strangers. I don't think that there is any other art form with which you engage with this kind of intimacy. I was telling Wu before this meeting that I was sharing his short story with my kid, and his story has this beautiful thing about a young boy who likes reading, and he enters this house and there is a ghost. And my kid was like enraptured, like in this entirely new world. Nothing, no TV or no picture would take him to that world. That a PDF of his work did. So I think because so much of when you write, so much is left unsaid, and there are no pictures, and despite all this multimedia, I don't want a novel to have hyperlinks and audio embedded and MP3. If it's just plain text, it's Microsoft Word. There's nothing else. I think it just forces you to think. It forces you to build in your head a world. And I think, at least in my case, it plays a very, very important role that you connect with people. A good novel from anywhere in the world, and I'm not going to get into what is good, what is bad, but a novel that speaks to you speaks much more loudly than the best film does. Films also are wonderful. There's wonderful cinema, and it haunts you as well. Wonderful films change your life, but a novel reaches to you in very intimate and deep ways.
I think also, I was thinking of the magic in your novel, the fantasy. I do think, to answer another way of answering your question, I think the novel is the closest that we can get of all art forms to human interiority.
Yeah. I think
and
yeah.
Now, whether that becomes an accurate reflection of the contemporary mindset, I'm not sure. Because so much of, I think, contemporary life is to resist interiority, to resist being wrong.
I think, being a journalist, I know that I would not recommend my novel to anyone who wants a depiction of modern Delhi. There are much finer PhDs on this. There's much better sociological work on this. So I would not recommend a story to sort of help you understand the reality, whatever that means, of Delhi or of modern India. They're far, far better works. But what I would say that, if you're looking for the fun stuff, for what goes on inside the head, so you read, so you're right that whether the interiority is useful as a reflection of reality, that I don't know. Like if, I read Snow, but I don't know if you've read Snow by Orhan Pamuk, but that was my first introduction to contemporary Turkey. So I read Snow before I read History of Turkey in detail. And Snow is a remarkable book. So while it is fiction and while it is deeply about interiority, it's about love. It's about love going wrong and faith and religion. But it sort of gives you a wonderful idea of what modern day Turkey is.
Hi, my name is Ganesh. I'm a content writer for News TV website. I have two separate questions. The first question is about journalism. The news stories of Rahul Pandit, Pravin Swamy, P. Sainath, or Rana Ayub. Most of them, they take the stand on the issue, and perhaps sometime against the state. So, to what extent it is better to take the stand in the news stories itself? My second question is about the place, and even the title is today's discussion is about the choice of the place in fiction. We see a lot of books on the metro cities, the fiction books on the metro cities, but the stories, most of the stories are inside the interior. I mean, a lot of stories are there. Why this kind of irony is here? And the place is important, but we most of the time focus on Kolkata, Delhi, Mumbai, these kind of places. Why? Thank you.
I will take the second one first. I think most of the stories are based in cities for a very, very simple reason that most of the storytellers are based in cities. I think we are still far away when there will be people, but there are some more in languages who you find they straddle both worlds wonderfully, the city and the village. And maybe 5 or 6 or 10 years later, you will find people writing in English about villages and writing that wonderfully. And we wait for that kind of work. It is not happening now for I think this very simple reason that most of the guys who can write in English, and that's the way it is, are people who live in cities and have gone to the English medium schools and education. That will change, I think. It will change sooner rather than later, but I think it will change as you find more and more kids in small towns going to English medium schools and very articulate. I find that because my niece lives in a small town, I go there regularly. I find a huge change in the last 5 to 8 years. So you find that, and that will happen. As to your first, as to is it right for journalists to take a stand when they write? I just cannot say yes or no. I think whatever works when you do justice to the subject. If somebody, as we said, if somebody is writing a story about a Syrian refugee camp, whether she should feel for the refugees or not, I don't know. It all depends on what she does with her work. And I think at the end of the day, it is how strongly the work speaks to you, and how strong it is illuminating something that you did not know. Whether she or he has taken a stand, I think that's irrelevant. And if you see, most of the good work in journalism is by people who don't put themselves in the story. As with good fiction as well, that you step back. And it's not about you. You're just the writer. The stories are happening to much more interesting people than you. And thank God there are people much more interesting than us who you use for your stories.
So I have 2 questions too. The first one is, you talked about complicated stories and easy narratives. The biggest problem I generally face is how to make complicated things easy. As a person who has to very often tell stories to make her go to sleep. How, and as a political science student, the only stories in my head are about Marx and Locke. How do you make those easy is one of the biggest problems that I find. And my second question is, you said you loved your characters, and my problem is, how do you kill your babies? Because you come to love your character because you made them and they are part of you. But how do you kill them? How do you step back enough to let them go? That's my two questions.
You don't kill them; they just walk away. The first day you see a book in this bookshop, buried under piles of what you think are mediocre books, you have let them go. That's much easier because when you write the book, you have an editor. I'm very lucky to have an editor, Dia, who's here. And so the first time that she reads my book, you've already let them go. And then she takes care of them, but she can only take care of them up to a certain point, and then it's over. And then you start inventing a new set of characters because you miss your old characters. They're all gone, and you'll never get them back. I will never get them back the way I got them back when I was writing the book. So that's you have to live with that loss. But I'll tell you, it's a much easier loss than loss of actual people. It is nothing compared to that loss. That's one. The second, about to make things easy, I completely agree with you. I think that life is a constant fight between doing justice to the complexity of the story and at the same time the strong need to make it simple. As I said, most of the things we want simplified narratives. Be it at our work, at our office, at our job, going to work, whatever. We don't want complicated narratives. It is wonderful to have a complicated narrative in fiction or in cinema, but not in life. That's a fact, and I think that's the constant struggle. As for your kid, is she your daughter?
No, she's my sister.
Sister. Yeah. So as for your kid, all I can tell you that do not simplify.
Well, the narrative in and of itself is a simplifying thing, because life is not really a narrative. We just create one for it. That's what makes it a little easier to swallow.
So keep all the complexity for fiction. But no, you're right. No, I think there is. I think the fact that we should embrace the complex, even if we don't understand it.
Two more questions.
Hi, you said in the end of your discussion that one has to be already deranged or has literally or figuratively gone mad to read a 250-page narrative.
Not mad, I say damaged.
Damaged, sorry. That's the politically correct term. Damaged or deranged to read a 250-page narrative, but to oppose you, me being a reader, and I have taken offense at that. One is that you're a journalist, you know the statistics of how many Indians daily read the English news dailies, and they have the most complex news. I mean, journalism is all about selling the news, whether it is in simpler form or complex form, and we read about, I don't know, a man being a prude reads about the importance of breastfeeding, and he would read it just as comfortably as he would read about the same thing being explained in a novel. And second thing, India being a young nation, as you quoted so many times the statistics, even a 22-year-old reads a Harry Potter, which is a 1,000-page book. Or, okay, there are not many things as good as a Harry Potter or a Mahabharata where a kid reads a 1,000-page book, but I do not accept that we have to be deranged to read a 250 book. I mean, we often read that many words in a Sunday supplement of any English news daily.
No, you do not have to be damaged, I'm sorry. There is no, but no, what I meant was that a complicated story. Reading a newspaper or sort of reading, that's the job we do, or sort of reading a manual or reading your file. But reading something that is a complicated story, where you have to sit for sort of a longer period, extended period. You don't sit for 90 minutes with your newspaper.
I disagree. There are so many senior citizens, no offense to them, but they wait for the morning newspaper so religiously, and they sit with it all the day if they can get through.
Of course, no. So I'm not saying that the point I was making, that I think there are missing pieces in all of us, and good literature or good art, be it a great piece of film or painting or music or whatever art is these days, a good piece of art seems to fill those missing pieces.
Yes.
It can be anything. It varies from each one of us. So when I said that you have to be damaged, damage is a very strong word. But it is about the feeling that you have a missing piece.
I don't think it's a strong word. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. But I mean, you listen to like the Beach Boys, the love story, the Pet Sounds. You bring your pain, you bring your heartbreak to the songs that you listen to. So you are damaged when you engage with it. It's a good thing, though.
And you repair that. Some good pieces, and I'm not judging it. I think a very silly film can heal you. So it's not that there's low art and there's high art, but anything interesting that somebody has made, created out of their imagination, it reaches out to somebody else because there is a missing piece.
I'm tempted to respond to the last question by explaining why everyone should take the time to read the Mahabharata, even though it's very long. But although I know a little bit about that, basically I'm an outsider coming to India. And I have a question that I ask as an outsider, even though I realize that it may be completely boring. It may be something that's already been completely discussed. So if it's boring, just say so. But I was really captivated by the things you talked about from the beginning, about the voices that you hear when you go on the metro, and about hope as something that we write. And as you went on talking, it seemed to me that several times you expressed what sounded to me like the hope that as time goes by, more and more people will be writing in English. But you didn't explain why it should be important that they write in English, when presumably many of those voices that they hear on the metro are not voices in English. And I'm wondering, how that feels to you in terms of the intimacy that you were talking about. Does it mean that you recognize you will be reaching only a certain audience, or does it have any impact on how you feel about the prospects of that intimacy? I can't really imagine the linguistic situation that you feel when you write these things.
That's a very, very interesting one, because no, of course not. When I said that more and more will be writing in English, that was just a straight sort of based on mathematics hypothesis that there will be more and more people who will be comfortable with the language. So it's not the normative thing of should they write in English or should they not.
But you view it as meaning then that more and more people will be touched by that?
Yes.
Or does that not enter?
Yeah, that's the factor. One is because there are more and more homes now where you have, you find in cities now homes where the husband and the wife, the language they speak in at home is in English. You are seeing the first generation of kids grow up speaking English at home. And they may have some incredibly fascinating stories to tell, which we did not. That is one, because where the dad and the mom come from different states. and they have met at a workplace, say, or in a school or a college, and you find that they speak in English. So maybe that will unlock a whole new world of stories. That is one.
Because that is part of their home.
Yes.
As well.
And the second thing is, I completely agree with you that, you know, why not other languages? And I think you're very right. There is a lot more interesting stuff. I personally believe there's a lot more interesting stuff happening in Hindi writing, for example, in Hindi cinema. There's a lot more interesting work than in Hindi literature, and there's a lot of interesting screenwriting going on. So you may find all these voices. There will be, you know, which it said that I very strongly believe that in the next 5, 7, 10 years, you know, as people who are in school or college right now, in Delhi or in small towns, facing this shift, these fault lines that we talk about, there will be a wonderful set of stories to be told in different languages. Yeah.
One last question. Lots of people raise questions about how complicated narratives in other languages, and building on the thoughts that many people have expressed, that lots of complicated narratives exist in other Indian languages. And in English right now, as you've correctly pointed out, that we do not have, say, 50 great literature works written in English as yet. And in the future, we look forward to Indian writing in English. So do you think we are in sort of like a cultural limbo right now, where we're losing the stories of, say, our rural roots, because we are not using our Indian languages, reading them as, or learning them as much as we're learning, say, English? And then in the future, we look forward to those stories being retold in English. Are we in sort of like a confused state right now?
That's a very interesting thought. I think maybe we are. And I think we just, and I'm wearing my journalist hat here. I think this is that maybe this has to do with society and with economics. The English speaking intellectual establishment is far stronger. It's a fact. Bad or good, it is there. You know, you can't wish it in any way. That is the language in which discourse it dominates. You know, a simple thing. The number of people who read English language newspapers is a fraction of those who read papers every morning. But the English language media and English language TV has a disproportionately high impact in defining popular discourse. That's a subject for study. Bad or good, I don't know. But you're right. I think it will happen when there are very strong intellectual centers, sort of outside the city-urban map. The one way, when will that happen depends on other forces. It's not what we would like to happen. For example, when is there a great liberal arts university in a state capital? When will that build? There are a few, but not as many as we wish there were. So I think these are very interesting questions, but the fact that it is decentralizing everywhere. If you go on YouTube, for example, you know, there's a lot more interesting stuff in Hindi than there ever was. You find a lot more interesting stuff happening in regional languages, in poetry, at any literary festival. You know, if you see the Jaipur festival, which is, I'm not saying it is the most accurate representation, but if you take it as a dipstick, from the year it started and now, it's about, I think, 8, 9, 10 years, the Hindi section has gone bigger and bigger. But this time I was delighted to sort of sitting on a lecture about Sanskrit, which has never happened, you know. So you find that now whether these are straws in the wind or there's something, you know, I completely agree.
If you're interested, just today there was an essay in the New York Times. The title was "How English is Ruining Indian Literature." I'm curious what you. Did you read that? Yeah.
Okay, well, they're not going to go anywhere, but I think we need to wrap it up and you can ask the questions individually. We should come back on Monday when we'll have two photographers talking about whether artists are generalists or specialists. We're going to resolve that matter. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.